Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hey/X/ I've lurked for a while, and after some consideration I wanted to write out what happened to me some years ago, hoping it would be therapeutic. Well, I ended up spilling my guts out onto the page and figured I'd share it. I'm going to be lazy and just copy-paste. Attached is a photo of my doggo and guns I bought. This is probably the most fucked up thing I have or will ever experience in my life, but I'm finally able to gather my cojones and write down what happened. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and just to clarify, I live east of the Cascades, so it's not the lush, wet forest people tend to think of, but instead dry and full of big ponderosa pines with sparse undergrowth. This happened a few years ago in spring, when after a cold, long winter I wanted to get out and explore. I'm not very experienced with bushcraft, but I've been camping before, and I'm not a fat ass, so I was confident I could pull off a simple backpacking trip in the mountains north of where I live. Even though I've been up there a few times, I still took my Kel-Tec Sub 2000 with, and my lever-action 12-gauge with 10 shells alternating shot and slugs. As for companionship, I took my German Shepherd Saxon with me. He's young but is a pretty tough dog, and he'll kill anything smaller than him without hesitation, and he could definitely hold his own if a coyote got a little too bold. The teeth and jaws on that dog are just scary. So, we take off, and about an hour later, I park my truck at the foot of the hills, ruck up, and Saxon runs out. The hills and mountains are beautiful, and the weather is perfect. I put on my favorite leather western hat. I know, cringe, but it felt right with my shotgun. And we step off into the wilderness. It's gonna be fun, boys. Fun. I planned on heading north for a few days, then loop back around using the Forest Service Road as a handrail if I get lost. First couple days were absolutely uneventful. We saw a couple of deer and spooked a few grouse, but nothing all that exciting. Wake up early on the last day before turning around and the mountains feel totally uninviting. Not like they felt totally inviting in the first place, but that's the best way I can describe it. Like when you're at a party and you don't know anyone and your friend says he's on his way, so you just force a smile and you act like everything is fine. Saxon also seemed different too. He appeared more focused, but not on a specific spot, like if he was hunting a rat or after seeing a stray cat. I clip his leash on him and figure I'm just working myself up because I've never been out this far, and Saxon is just picking up on my anxiety. It was sometime around midday when we were making our way to the top of the next ridge before we turned around, when the unease came back and made me stop in my tracks. And no, there wasn't a smell, voices, or pentagrams in trees, just that same damn feeling. Saxon also looked on edge, and now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think he ever relaxed that whole time. He still looked around like regular, but he didn't have that dopey tail-wagging demeanor a dog out in the woods was looking to mark the nearest tree. But instead, he stuck to me like glue and held his head low, like after I yell at him when he gets in the trash. I know I'm focusing a lot on my dog, but I never realized this until now, and I feel really dumb for being so oblivious. We were starting to near the top of the ridge when we began to enter a snowfield. I know it was spring, but it still gets cold up there, and it was a tough, long winter. The mud was thick and heavy, which made for some incredibly slow going and stank of decay. But when we hit the snow, we cleaned the mud off our boots, paused the best we could, and hurried to the summit. The closer to the top we got, the trees became far and few between, causing the snow to become almost blinding. Finding a tree, we took a break and I fished around in my pack for my sunglasses. As I was doing so, Saxon was transfixed on me, thinking he was going to get fed. As soon as I felt the lenses of my sunglasses, I began to pull them out, and that's when I heard what sounded like the shifting of weight in wet snow, that muffled kind of crunch. I froze, and Saxon's heavy, excited breathing stopped as he whipped his head around and looked downhill toward a cluster of scrawny, gnarled ponderosa pines. I held my breath and strained my ears, hoping to hear it again. Posting photo of Kel-Tec and mags. Nothing, just pure cold silence except for the light breeze weaving through the pine needles. Saxon now was totally alert, with the hair on his back standing on end, The feeling of unease totally subsumed me, and a shudder tore through my entire body. When I started my trip, I knew there were big cats, but they're so rare and skittish, I didn't think it would be a problem. I put my sunglasses away so I wouldn't be obscured by vision and exchanged them for my Kel-Tec. As an aside, these little guns are so cool, they take Glock 17 mags and they fold in half so they're easy to store. So I snapped it into place and loaded a big 33 round mag into it and put the other 2 mags in my pocket. I released the charging handle and chambered a 9mm round. The sound of the bolt sliding home skid across the snow unobstructed into the valley below and echoed back. At first, I was reassured by the clack of the bolt, but the unnerving silence that followed brought with it the all-too-familiar uneasiness that defined the day. Saxon was now a bristling, intense ball of muscle and fur. I put my pack on, got a good hold of Saxon's leash, slung my shotgun, couched the butt of my Kel-Tec into my shoulder, and trained it on the spot where we heard that crunch of snow. Slowly, we ambled down the slope, making a wide arc, giving ourselves plenty of space between us and our new friend. Making it down to the snow line, I looked over and saw our muddy tracks when we first entered the field. But maybe 10 feet away, there was another set of muddy tracks parallel to ours dissipating into the snow. That's when I knew without a shadow of a doubt I wasn't overreacting. Suddenly, Saxon puffs up again and is violently sniffing the air. All I smell is the putrid mud when it hits me. And no, it wasn't that cliché metallic twang or blood and guts, but rather a musk or maybe stale piss. I only got one good whiff because after that, Saxon and I began to tear down the hill, first having to fight the thick clinging mud, and then scrambling down the loose basalt and soil hillside. I didn't dare look back, only focused on my feet, Saxon, and where my gun was pointed. I don't know if the sound of shifting rocks behind us was caused by our haste, but I really didn't want to look. Finally, we made it into a draw of the ridge, Saxon panting but his head on a swivel, and me out of breath wanting nothing more than to shit, piss, and vomit all at the same time. I knew I had to find a road and use it to escape this terrifying new existence I found myself in. We continued down into the valley where eventually we would find a service road. The feeling of terror was dissipating, but the urgency of escape was still there. At this point, daylight was waning, and the mountains can obstruct the sun further. Fortunately, central Washington has a unique geology, and we found ourselves next to a cliff of basalt columns and an open field in front of it. I got a bonfire lit, and after feeding Saxon and gnawing on some jerky, I sat against the cliff, racked a shell in my shotgun, and double-checked my carbine. Next thing I remember was waking up to Saxon right next to me, snarling in the dim light of the fire. I frantically scanned my surroundings and my blood froze as I saw 2 yellow and green pinpoints of light in the distance. They weren't all that high off the ground, but when that smell hit me, I instantly knew this was our friend. I slowly drew up my shotgun, but I had a sickening realization that the double-aught buck might just piss it off compared to a slug, and I wasn't going to look away and grab my carbine. So we entered a staring competition in the dying firelight. Every so often it would try and approach, but Saxon would just bark his head off, and the eyes would slowly retreat. I couldn't tell you how long we played this game until the faint little fingers of light began to fan out from behind the ridge in front of me, and with that meager amount of light, I finally saw, or at least saw, the silhouette of it. The outline wasn't anything like a big cat. Instead of the squat form of a cat laying down to stay low and hidden, I instead saw something that, although looked to be on all fours, looked too awkward to be in that position. Long, wiry limbs were splayed out to the sides. The body was thin but deep like a racing dog's. But the head, or at least the shape, is what made my brain reboot. It was in that uncanny valley where it looked human but just looked off. The best way to describe that initial sighting was like taking a child's drawing of a person where the general shape is there, but all the pieces that make a face human were missing. With the sun slowly rising, the eyes began to swivel around in an erratic, almost nervous way, and it began to retreat slowly. I know I said that its limbs looked awkward for quadrupedal locomotion, but I was wrong. The most unnerving thing was the macabre gracefulness it was able to accomplish as it began to slink into the undergrowth. I finally broke out of my trance and squeezed the trigger on my shotgun. Boom, the noise was absolutely deafening after that silent hours-long standoff. The shot hit the center of mass, causing it to reel up. At that point, blowing my head off seemed smarter just then. Since I was sitting down, I knew I couldn't accurately tell how tall it was at that moment, but Christ, it seemed to tower over me just then. Just when the ringing in my ears was starting to fade, this thing began to scream. Howl. I don't know what to call it, but fuck was it loud and still gives me the heebie-jeebies. It was so much more shrill than I would have thought from something that size, but it was so raspy and had a gurgle to it. Unbelievably, it held that sound for what felt like forever, as it looked straight at Saxon and I. We were immobilized as this thing let loose its pure animus towards the pain it must have found itself in. As this primal scream was ending, it trailed off into a low guttural moan or growl. Finding just the will to move again, I ripped the lever down, ejecting the spent shell and slammed the lever back, driving home the slug into the chamber, and almost simultaneously I pulled the trigger. I must have yanked on the trigger because the slug hit either its collarbone or shoulder. I couldn't really tell, because it seemed to have recoiled with that impact, spun and leapt onto the nearest ponderosa, scrabbling at it like a squirrel. Last one for the night, folks. I'm gonna pass out and hopefully sleep. As it climbed, chunks of loose bark and dead pine needles dropped onto the bed of pine straw below. The slender form almost seemed to vanish in the maze of tree limbs. A bark or maybe a grunt could be heard as more scraping emanated from a tree further away as it retreated from view. I stood there fixated on the pines dimly illuminated when the whine from Saxon behind me almost made me jump out of my skin. He stood there, transfixed on the tree line too, but cowering behind me and shaking in fear. I couldn't blame him in all honesty, since I felt the exact same way. Well shit, I wake up and it's archived. Guess I'll take that extra chromosome now. Sorry to have posted in the wrong thread. Like I said, I was severely drunk and fucked up. We stood there as the fire smoldered to coals, and the sun finally began to make its way over the ridge, illuminating the valley below. It was dawning on me just how screwed I am, as well as the cooling piss on my pants. This thing can hide in trees and take 2 different loads from a 12 gauge. It was obvious now. We had to avoid groups of trees and stay in open fields if we wanted to get out of here. Of course, that's easier said than done, when many of the open areas are loose basalt scree fields and steep hillsides. However, it seemed that it preferred to attack in the dark, and hopefully I gave it a healthy fear of guns. Keeping all of this in mind, we moved with purpose, doing my best to avoid stands of trees, but keeping my eyes trained on them, hoping to spot any irregularities. I've never moved like that, and for so long before. My thighs burned as we moved up and over the next spur, and my knees ached as we descended into the following draw. The closer we got to our 4-wheeled savior, the more the area opened up, exposing what must have been old rangeland. Although our pace was much faster compared to the initial trip, the sun was slowly making its predetermined arch westward toward the horizon. Now the decision of either hunkering down for the night or keep running weighed heavy in my mind. What worked in the past had to be a fluke. No way would a predator approach me in the same exact way again. But if I keep running, that could be exactly what it wants. I knew that I had to rely on Saxon as a warning system, and right now he had his ears pressed down and kept his head low as he kept pace with me. He and I were now the prey, and I think we both relied upon each other in order to survive the quickly approaching night. The clock was ticking down now as daylight was fast approaching its end. It didn't feel right, but I was optimistic that posting up on a spur and making a big enough fire would keep it at bay. But gathering firewood was a gamble, and time was no longer on my side. We ran until finally our salvation was found. A large open field with a few small Douglas firs and a big downed cottonwood. This cottonwood was long dead but must have fallen during the winter due to the heavy snowfall. It had shattered into what seemed like 1,000 pieces, with limbs and bits of trunk scattering into a shape making a facsimile of a tree still full of life. Dragging limbs into the makeshift fire pit, I wanted to build up a fire big enough to attract the attention of forest rangers, sheriff deputies, maybe even some high school kids looking to get drunk. Something I should have remembered with poplar wood is when they burn hot and bright, but not for long. but I was sure this big girl had more than enough material to last me the night. Once again, the thin wisps of light from the retreating sun hovered over the far-off western ridge, giving way to the eventual twilight. However, my fire was a symbol of defiance against the encroaching night. Its flames licked at the quickly cooling air, and its light gave me reassurance. For a moment I felt a connection to humans long past, who upon harnessing the power of fire became masters of their domain, no longer fearing the long nights and unseen foes. But I was a product of modernity, an alien to this environment where my survival wasn't guaranteed, and I was finally understanding that. I looked over to Saxon, who had at one point fallen asleep in the gentle heat of the fire, exhausted from our experience. This feeling of relief, although fleeting, was exactly what my body needed, to allow my muscles to finally relax and my mind to focus on nothing. I laughed at the realization that this is how a long backpacking trip should feel. I'm not sure how long our friend let us relax and become distracted. Maybe it was a strategy to lull us into a sense of false security, or maybe it just wanted to take its time and savor the hunt. I don't know. Over the crackle of the flames, I finally heard the sharp snap of a tree limb, unable to sustain the weight forced upon it. Saxon immediately jumped up, ears like radar dishes feverishly scanning the trees to our west. I was copying him, standing in front of the flames, scanning the trees for anything that stood out. Nothing looked different. Just the dying wind of the evening and the pop of a poplar limb in the fire. Probably doing the dumbest thing since actually coming up here, I bellowed out a howl of frustration at our unseen stalker. After bellowing my rage and defiance into the inky blackness, I stood there taking deep breaths and looked down at Saxon, who was staring up at me with a perplexed expression. His attention was quickly taken off me as his nostrils flared, sucking in the air around us. Again, it only took a few moments until I was graced with the scent of its musk. My stomach turned, not because of the odor, but from the fact we were thrown back into this nightmare. Saxon was still looking intently into the woods, straining at his leash and barking into the unseen. I decided to join him, but instead with the carbine. It was honestly just a spray and pray scenario, sending round after round into the woods. It's scary how quickly 33 rounds can be sent down range when you're under pressure. I only snapped out of it when the expected bang was replaced by the click of the trigger. My ears were ringing, but the overwhelming smell of burnt powder brought a modicum of relief. This confidence caused me to look down to change out the magazine. After releasing the bolt, I looked up, and the all too familiar glints of eyes were staring at us. It might have been just my mind playing tricks on me, but they seemed to be moving, almost gliding as it made its way south and down the hill. I was again paralyzed by the predatory gaze of something unknown, with all rational thought thrown to the wayside. Saxon was silent as well. We were both frozen in place, terrified and in an almost grotesque awe. It took too long for me to realize, but this thing was cutting off my escape route. In a disgusting parody of Saxon and I in the snowfield, it made an arch downhill. But rather than an effort to escape, it was tightening the noose. Looking back, I don't know if this was a sign of intelligence or instinct, but that feeling of hopelessness drained the strength from me. At that moment, all those days of running and trudging up and down hills hit me like a 5-ton sack of shit. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was so absolutely over my head now and ready to give up. That's when Saxon put himself between my legs and looked up at me with those big dopey eyes. At that moment, I knew that it wasn't about me, but about my companion who had stuck with me and had been my teammate through this nightmare. So that was it. No more hasty decisions that might put Saxon and I in danger. Cue the Sabaton boys. This might just be our last stand. Again, we played the same game as last night, but instead of coming in close, it only stayed in the perimeter of the tree line, unwilling to expose itself in the light of the fire. Every so often, that eyeshine would vanish only to reappear dozens of feet away, and every time it would send chills down my spine. Every so often, I would crack off a few 9mm rounds to try and scare it, but the amount of ammo I had was dwindling, and it only seemed to get bolder, and the amount of energy I had was now matching my reserves of ammo. I was fighting sleep, catching myself stumbling. I finally allowed myself to sit for the first time in what felt like hours. This next part feels like a blur now, but I'm going to recount it as best as possible. I remember looking up at the stars, feeling a little delirious. I looked back down at the fire, mesmerized by the shifting colors of the coals, when out of the corner of my eye I spotted the faintest pinpoint of light in the distance. I honestly had no idea what it was for a few brief seconds, until I realized it was 2 dots of lights. Headlights? No, the service road can't be that close by. They must have turned a corner around a bend, because they disappeared for what felt like an eternity, until they rematerialized again. I had almost forgotten about the tree line, and when I looked up, that pair of eyes seemed much closer now. Did it see the headlights too? Or maybe it took advantage of me breaking eye contact. I didn't and still don't know, but I knew that it was do or die soon and I had to make a decision. My head kept going side to side, trying to spot the headlights again and maintaining eye contact with it. As I looked into the woods after losing those eyes in the darkness, a circle of light suddenly illuminated the tree line, quickly scanning the open field, making its way towards me. I couldn't believe it and looked back to the road. There sat a truck with a spotlight panning over the field, until I was hit with an absolutely blinding light. I blinked the stars out of my eyes for a few seconds, and without a moment's hesitation I grabbed my Kel-Tec, slung my shotgun and grabbed Saxon's leash. I don't care about my pack or everything else. We're making a break for it. I remember sprinting downhill, partially illuminated by the spotlight, screaming and waving my free hand frantically. I looked back for a split second and saw a shapeless blur pass right by my fire. I ran harder, Saxon easily keeping pace with me as we made our way downhill toward the truck. As we got closer, I could hear the rumble of the engine, and then a voice called out, "What's with all the shooting out here, son?" My only response was a girly-ass scream, followed by the scream of the thing chasing us. "What the fuck was that?" screamed the driver as Saxon and I reached the truck. I remember throwing this 80-pound dog into the truck bed and launching myself in right behind him. "We gotta go. Please turn this thing around." I guess the trembling in my voice as I yelled along with that monstrous cry must have convinced him, since the truck began to turn around, kicking up loose gravel and illuminating a wide arch with its headlights. As we made the last of the turn, the spotlight still pointed perpendicular to the truck, illuminated for a split second by our friend standing in the road. It must have been right behind the truck, ready to pluck Saxon and I out of the bed before the truck started to move. But in that split second of light, I saw it hunched over, hiding its head from the blinding light. Its pinkish gray skin was pulled tight over a thin frame of bones, with limbs disproportionate to its body pulled up tight, and like a spring launched itself off the road down into the valley below. And that was it. That was the last of it. I laid down in that truck bed, bouncing in that steel coffin as the driver did the best he could to avoid the larger potholes. It felt like it didn't take all that long until we came to a stop with the headlights illuminating my truck, which felt small now in comparison. As I loaded Saxon into my truck, the driver kept trying to get my attention, but I just didn't have the desire to talk to this guy. I feel bad now for giving my rescuer the cold shoulder, but as I climbed into my truck, I remember him yelling something to the effect of, "That was one of the freakiest cougars I've ever seen." He then revved his engine and drove off. As I drove home, I kept thinking over and over again, if what I saw was a cougar. Even writing this, I still wonder, was it a diseased cougar that fared poorly over the winter and saw Saxon and I as easy prey? Or was it something else, something that shouldn't exist? With my zero artistic talent, I drew up what I had been trying to suppress for years, drawing up what I saw that morning and later on the road. Thanks for listening /x/. I hope maybe I can finally come to peace with this whole experience.
I live in a small town surrounded by lakes and woods, so hiking is one of my favorite activities. There's this one particular trail I usually take and then wander off from. That day was not particularly different, except the weather was especially windy. Nevertheless, I went for my hike as usual and trailed off the beaten path. The moment I stepped deeper into the woods, something felt off. The air felt heavier, and I could hear the wind picking up. Was it going to storm soon? I checked the weather report. The day was supposed to be clear. I decided to go back to the trail and get to my car. The moment I turned around, I heard something deeper in, like 100 voices whispering all at once, calling out to me. I tried to ignore it, but it got louder in my ears until it muffled the wind. I was tempted to run for my life, and I probably should have. But I looked back, and I saw something. I saw a humanoid figure hunched over near some trees. It was hard to make out any details, but it looked big. The woods around it looked out of place, like it was warping them with its sheer presence. I turned and ran back to the trail, and by the time I got to the car, I was out of breath. I still hike, but not on those trails.
And now, a story from America's heartland. Rivers crisscross the Ozarks. Rivers and streams and creeks, their timeless tracks biting deep into the rock of the mountains. In these limestone cracks and hollows, the American Indians once sheltered. There's a particular stream, ordinary in most ways, some miles outside Little Rock. It's a beautiful drive, especially in the morning, the mist and fog glowing pink in the early light, almost magic against the mossy green Ozarks. Off the highway, you'll find a winding dirt road, red dust trail worn down by years of travel. On this road, you'll find not much but trees, few houses, some lived in, some not. One house, old and abandoned, sits at the top of a ravine. Through the ravine winds an offshoot of some unnamed river, flowing since the ice crawled back north. The stream. In the rocky east bank, there's a cave, like many dotting the area, not more than 15 feet into the earth. Dirt floor, rock walls, paintings. The caves are full of paintings, carvings, the odd arrowhead or bit of bone. In this cave, however, known only to a few, are carvings not like any other ground into the Ozark rock. If you find this road, go down it to this house, wind your way through the woods to that particular stream, and manage to eke out that cave, just let it be. Don't go poking about in it, don't touch the carvings, and if you find any arrowheads, don't move them. If your curiosity gets the better of you, like it did me, go, see, leave. Don't take pictures, don't take the arrowheads, don't touch the carvings. I first heard tell of the cave from my pa. The house belonged to his pa, and to hear him tell it, something was never quite right about the place. Grandpa always had the place strung up in lights, but even so, there were always odd goings on. Weird noises and shapes like to flit to and fro in those woods, whispers and shapes that showed themselves to those who looked for them. I remember he once took me back to the old place, not so old back in those days. Grandpa was still alive. He looked at Pa funny, looked at me, and said words that I'll always remember. "You remember the rules, son?" My pa said yes and took me by the hand, through those woods, down the slope and through the creek. It was fall then, the creek was low. I followed him up to the cave, and Pa sat me down on the dirt floor to look at the carvings. Weird spirals and curves, all springing out from one image. It looked almost like a man, except where a man had 2 arms and legs, this thing had 3. 3 legs all arranged even-like, 2 arms on one side and 1 on t'other. It had horns, antlers rather, and 2 big owl eyes. Just describing it, it seems funny, lewd even, like a 3rd leg joke. But it wasn't funny then, and remembering those eyes, it ain't funny now. There was something in those eyes, carved though they were, lines blacked in by centuries of smoke and soot, moss and lichen. Big black eyes that stared out at you from the cave wall. Seeing into your soul, Grandpa used to say. I used to have bad dreams about that place. I never really liked Grandpa's, but that cave especially. Those spirals and lines burning into my sleeping mind, and those eyes staring into my soul. Blackeyes watches you when you sleep. Back when Grandpa died, I found myself back at the old place for the first time in years. At Grandpa's wake, I wandered off, the sun sitting low in the sky. I had one of the first old picture phones, the really grainy ones. I got the idea in my head to take pictures of the carvings. I didn't know the rules then. I climbed down the ravine and hop-stepped across the creek. Early summer rain had made it swell. I sat down on that old dirt floor and found Blackeyes there, almost waiting for me. I snapped a few pictures in the here bright light. East Bank has a clear shot at the setting sun. I thought I sensed something changed in that cave. Something felt bad where before it just felt sacred, I guess. I crawled out on hands and knees, speeding my way up the ravine, feeling Blackeyes watching me all the way back. I met up with Pa and the rest of the family in time to sit down. Uncle Justin was standing in front of the old smokehouse and spoke, saying that he knew that this sit-down wasn't planned, but it was strict family business, and anyone not directly related to Grandpa should get back home. Thanks for coming. Once the last of the non-relatives said their confused goodbyes, Justin got back up on his podium. He said that before Grandpa died, he hadn't had time to tell some of the younger family members something important, and had included in his will a set of rules for the young'uns. To my surprise, they were about the cave. They were as follows. 1. Don't let anyone who doesn't know the rules into the cave alone. 2. Don't touch the carvings. 3. Don't touch the arrowheads. 4. Don't take any pictures. And that was it. No explanations. None needed. Grandpa was always kind of a kook, one of those old neo-pagans, but had a deep love and respect for the woods. The cousins my age all looked puzzled but proud, like they were a bit more grown up. My phone sat heavily in my pocket. That night I stayed in the old room upstairs where I slept during those old visits. The old nightmares came back, the ones with the spirals and lines and eyes. I woke up to rustling outside. I looked out the second-story window, seeing a pair of antlers and a tuft of tail vanish into the trees. It was a deer, sure enough, but something about the shadows cast by those strings of light gave it an odd quality, like it had too many legs. God, how I didn't know what I was in. The next morning I left with Pa and we made our way back home up in West Fork. I fondled my phone the whole ride back. My dad teased me about texting girls and I shakily agreed. We got home, a one-story house sharing some common woods with a few other houses. I unpacked my stuff, played some video games, and when night came around, my eyes went back to my phone. It was lying on my pillow where I dropped it after getting back. I approached it cautiously, opened it, and navigated to the picture folder. I opened the thumbnail dated for last night and nearly dropped the phone. Blackeyes was there, but there was something about it that wasn't quite right. The lines seemed almost thicker, the face somehow more defined from the basic oblong. And the eyes were the worst part of all. All around those eyes and horns, the spirals and lines seemed new, almost bright. I snapped the phone shut, plugged it in, and pulled a book out to read. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I remember when I started dreaming. I remember walking through the woods near Grandpa's house, only noticing how the trees started becoming chalkier, straighter, and the foliage spiraling, all seeming carved into the air. The carving trees started getting brighter, almost glowing, and the air between them became thick. I walked through the petroglyph forest, and without realizing it, I walked out over the ravine. The cave shadow was no longer black, but white. Everything looked like a photo negative, darks and lights swapping places, everything made of those same lines and spirals. I was pulled into the cave. Inside the awful white shadow cave, there he stood, Blackeyes. No longer some ancient stick figure. It was flesh and blood. Standing on 3 deer legs, a man's torso, 2 man-arms, one furred and clawed like a grizzly's. But it was the head that struck me most, if such a thing is possible in dreams. It was round, almost hear-shaped, like a barn owl's. But where a barn owl's face is calm and elegant with an almost chubby feel, this face was gaunt and withered, those wise owl eyes cracked and flat, and utterly staring. From behind those eyes grew 2 deer antlers. All I could feel was pure terror, no malice, just a cold, burning fear bubbling out of those eyes, fear spiraling, growing and shooting out of those eyes. I tried to pull away and run, but Blackeyes stepped forward awkwardly on his 3 legs. It reached out with that grisly arm, whispering. I awoke, still hearing the whispers, staring at the ceiling. In the dark, I felt I could almost see spirals and lines and eyes. The next morning, I looked at my phone again. Blackeyes was there, appearing as it did in my dream. That afternoon, when Pa got home from work, I told him about the dreams, sobbing, and showed him my phone. I told him that I didn't know the rules when I took the picture. He looked at the picture, face drained of all color. He looked at me, forcing a smile. "Everything's gonna be okay, son. I'll take care of this, don't you worry, Everything's gonna be okay. He pocketed my phone and told me he was going to town for a bit. If you're wondering how I remember all this detail, it's because it was the last time I saw my pa. That night, Uncle Michael picked me up from home, eyes red. I panicked and asked him where my pa was. My pa had been in a car accident, went head-on with one of the trucks that frequent the highway near West Fork. The trucker was okay. The police asked me a few questions before I went home with Uncle Michael. I said nothing about the nightmares or pictures, nothing about Blackeyes. My phone was eventually returned to me. I checked it. The picture from a few nights before was gone. The police say my pa died with a smile on his face. They said it was a smile of defiance, like he thought he could take out a Peterbilt with his station wagon. I know different things. My pa died for me that night. Blackeyes watches you while you sleep, watches for you to die. If you find that cave by that creek, don't go in, touch anything, and don't take any pictures.
I won't Greentext this shit. Simple new short story just for you, Anon. I'm going on this one from memory, so excuse my non-LARPing abilities. This friend of mine works as a live-in healthcare assistant, I believe that's what it's called. Instead of working someplace day by day like a nursing home, he lives in the patient's home for several days. So he goes to this house that has a pretty huge garden with nothing around. The patient is an old man, can't remember what was his problem, but probably dementia. While my friend stayed there, some weird stuff happened to him, like the TV turning on by itself. He said he would also hear people talking during the night. I believe the old man also heard it and did say something to him about it, but I can't remember. And then one night, shit was bad. He woke with some knocking coming from the outside of the window in his room. He said fuck it and didn't do shit, past experiences and whatnot. I believe the knocking kept going and he probably started praying. And then a huge knock on the door happened. He said it was like someone was trying to break the door. The guy became pretty scared after that and talked to the daughter about what was happening. At first she blamed it on her brother, but she finally opened up and said something like the house had the ghost of her dead mum. Okay, sure. Friend, still freaking out, asks his company to be placed somewhere else as fast as possible. Stayed there for his full 15 days. On the last day, he woke up early as usual, got a package from the mailman at around 9 and got off from the place at around 1 p.m. I'll LARP this part just to make it funnier, it's true, but I simply can't remember when he met the guy. When he was going back home, a guy rings. He opens the door and the guy looks pretty angry. Why didn't you open the door earlier? We had all this planned out before. You knew I was going to come here at that time. My friend asks him if he had rang the bell earlier. Of course I did, and I could see someone behind the door, so I don't understand why you didn't open it. The man had claimed to have rang the door 1 hour after the mailman and that he saw a shadow behind the front door window. My friend never heard any bell ring. The patient was in bed at the time. It's a shame I can't just go check the messages and make the story more solid. I know I'm missing some cool stuff, but guess what? That's how real pastas are. People forget shit.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.